Okay, let's begin. Today's session is about incremental data refresh, intricacies, and gotchas for Power BI semantic models, right? So as you, perhaps everyone in the call know, data sets are now officially renamed to semantic models. So that's why we are sticking to the correct terminology from now on. And with that, let's begin. So I am Soheil Bakhshi. If you are Persian, you can definitely pronounce my surname perfectly fine. It would be Bakhshi. Okay. So if you are coming from connecting from any other parts of the world, you're welcome to my session, right? I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, a director, author, blogger, speaker, and consultant. Okay, with that, let's quickly go to the agenda of today's session. In today's session, we will discuss some introduction to incremental data refresh in Power BI, and to get a better understanding what incremental data refresh is and how it really works, how refreshes work in Power BI, right? And we go through some implementation basics. Well, the aim was to perhaps consider that whoever is attending this session is pretty familiar with incremental data refresh, but in some of the previous sessions, it turned out that it is not true, right? So we have to go through some basic implementation. And then we will talk about potential challenges with large semantic models when you implement incremental data refresh. We will discuss best practices. And last but not least, it would be a show and tell. So it is not a demo, because if I wanted to demo it, it would take much longer, right? So I'm not going to implement on the screen and show you how to do it. I'll just it is a sort of show and tell. Okay, so data refresh in Power BI. We have two types of data refreshes in Power BI, right? So when it comes to refreshing the data, and if you are coming from analysis services background, we are actually referring to data processing. So the regular data refresh, which is truncation and load, which has some sort of issues like data import performance issues and timeout issues during the data import. If we are dealing with large data models and we are piping a whole lot of data into our data model. The second type which is the topic of today's session, is incremental data refresh. This type is working based on partitions, right? So it creates partitions based on date. I will show you later how it works, right? And it requires an initial full refresh for the first time after we develop our data model within Power BI Desktop and we configure incremental data refresh. We publish it into Microsoft Fabric. The first time that we refresh the semantic model, it creates partitions for us, and then it refreshes each partition. We have two types of partitions. We have historical partitions, which will remain intact after the first data load, right? So they will not going to change at all. The second type or category of partitions are incremental partitions, which will get refreshed after the first initial refresh. So we publish our data model into Fabric. We refresh it for the first time, so it creates partitions and it populates the partitions with the data. After that point, whatever refreshes that happen, the historical partitions remain intact and incremental partitions will get refreshed. We can also detect data changes to improve the refresh performance, right? So imagine that you have 100 or 200 million rows or 500 million rows popped into a couple of partitions. It would be great to detect the changes of the data so that we only refresh the partitions that are required to be refreshed, right? So here's the thing. The way that Power BI works within the partitions, as I mentioned, it will create all the partitions, historical partitions and incremental partitions, right? And the historical partitions remain intact. It starts from, depending on our settings, it starts from year. It can be year, month, and day, or it can be year, quarter, month, right? But what it does, it keeps the year part unchanged. It will not change anyway, right? And the historical partitions include that year partition, and it may include some other partitions depending on how we configure our incremental policy, right? Now, we have a couple of partitions. What Power BI does, it goes and refreshes every single incrementally created partitions. It truncates that partition and loads the data again. So if I have big, large partitions, chances are that my performance would degrade, right? So that is exactly what we will discuss today, right? And incremental data refresh on premium licensing plans also support hybrid tables, which hybrid tables means that it keeps all other partitions, including incremental range in import mode, and it keeps the very last incremental partition in direct query mode, which means that we have sort of live stream data, right? Which is kind of cool, but it has some intricacies as well, right? So looking in the chat window, and I don't want this to be sort of just one-way talk, has anyone came up with any challenges with hybrid tables?
People can unmute themselves if they want. The microphone enable.
Okay, so I do not spend any more time on this. Just to be 100% clear, if you are working on a data model which is already built and you want to make a incremental refresh, make hybrid tables enabled on the incremental refresh, be mindful that all the connected tables to this specific table, which usually we are talking about a fact table, to be incrementally loaded because fact tables tend to be larger, right? All tables that are linked to this fact table, which are usually dimensions, must be in dual storage mode, right? To get the best performance out of it. Otherwise, if it is not in dual storage mode, because it keeps the very last partition in direct query mode, the relationship between the fact table and all the dimensions would be limited relationship, right? It wouldn't be a full relationship or regular relationship. With that, let's go to the next page, right? I tried to show you how incremental data refresh works. A regular table, a regular refresh will, again, truncate and load, right? The entire table, which means that that table has only one partition, right? So we have only one partition, one single partition, which we truncate and refresh. So we delete all the data and start refreshing the data from scratch. But in an incremental data refresh table, we have historical range, and we have incremental range and the real-time in direct query, right? And this is how it will appear, the partitions, after creation and population, right? So in this specific case, my incremental data refresh policy was to keep the last 7 days of data incrementally refreshed, while everything else would be historical, right? You may ask, okay, so I have, you have, and the rest is 10 years of data, okay? So you may say you have at the year level, those are the partitions at the year level, and then you have one in month level, and all of the others are in day level, right? How come it is incremental? So what is historical range? It is, Microsoft is using a very, very complex and very amazing technology in the background, right? What it does, when it gets to the next month, it generates a new month partition, and it just merges all of these partitions that I'm highlighting in blue, right? All of these partitions, it merges all of those partitions into a month level partition. And when it gets to the last day of year, it does the same for all of those monthly partitions, and it generates a new yearly historical partition, right? Does that translate to that these partitions are actually incremental? No, they are not. They are still in historical range, right? But they are just broken down into smaller chunks, because that is the aim of incremental data refresh. We want to get a better performance on refreshing the data model. Any questions so far on that?
There are two questions in the chat. I'm not sure it's a good time to ask those questions, but the first one is, would you please explain what you mean by partitions in Power BI?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one, I think they mentioned you can import hybrid tables on import mode and direct query mode. Is it right?
I mentioned you can import hybrid tables on import mode and direct query mode. The hybrid tables. Okay, so let me get back to here, right? So let's first pick the first question about partitioning, right? So as you can see in here, all of these things that you see in here, these are partitions on a single table, right? What Power BI does, partitions are actual objects within tables, right? So it literally creates, it tries to divide the big amounts of rows of data that are coming based on a column that you would set, and I will show you how to do it. You will configure in Power BI Desktop, and you say, okay, so based on this column, which can be date time or integer, right? Which date time is the easier one, right? You can say, okay, so divide the data, split the data into different partitions based on this specific criteria, and you just define the criteria, right? So if we say, so we have this is on this specific scenario, I have sales data from 2004 up until now, right? So for here, if you look at the underlying database is an SQL database. If you look at the underlying T-SQL query generated, it has a where clause, and it says, okay, so bring all the rows that are happening has happened in 2014. When year is 2014, right? And the next one would be 2015, 2016, and it goes on and on and on. And it generates partitions for based on the definition that we created, right? Okay, so to the next question, hybrid tables is just one table, right? a table that has different storage modes for the partitions, right? So this is just a single table, right? All of these parts, including incremental and historical partitions, are in import mode, so they are imported into the cache, while this section, which is the real-time partition, which is the very last partition, it is in direct query. Hopefully that answered your question. I'm conscious of time, so I just move faster to the next one. To define incremental data refresh, we have to take some steps, 5 or 6 steps, starting from Power Query Editor. In Power Query Editor, we have to define 2 query parameters, and these query parameters, the name of these query parameters are reserved, so range start and range end. These query parameters, the name are reserved for incremental data refresh, meaning these, after we publish this data model into Microsoft Fabric and we go to the semantic model settings, at the parameter section, we will not see these parameters. We cannot change the value of these parameters, right? So we define the start range and range start and range end, and the data type would be date time. Next, we filter the table that we want to have partitions. We pick a column which has date time data type. In this case, we are picking order date, right? And here's the thing, this is pretty important part of the setting. We have to mention that it would be after or equal to start range or range start, sorry, and before range end. We do not want the range start and range end to have overlap. Otherwise, we will get really odd results, right? So that's why. So it must be equal in this criteria or the other. Just remember not to have equal condition in both criteria, okay? And the third step is to load the data into the data model. Now I have all of my data loaded into the data model. I right-click on the table, which is internet sales, and I select incremental refresh. And this is where we define our incremental refresh policies, right? So I say I want to keep 10 years of data. So this 10 years of data is my historical range, right? And refresh only 7 days of data incrementally, right? So again, it goes and picks the last 7 days of data, it truncates each partition, and it reloads those partitions, right? If we have premium licensing plan, we can tick that box, which makes this specific table, which is in my case is internet sales. It makes it hybrid table. I decided not to do that because I perhaps do not have, well, I do not have any use cases for it. And we can say complete, only refresh the complete range. And depending on what we select here, that may change into month or something else, right? And detect data changes. This is pretty cool. This is the one that identifies. So let's say I am in this setting, I configured my policy to refresh 7 pages of data, right? And let's say I have, I don't know, 200 million rows on each day, right? It will be really useless if I do not have any changes in the past 3 days, or I may have a random change in data in one partition, which happened to be in the last 7 days partition, right? So in this specific setting helps us to refresh only the incremental partitions that has a data change in it. Otherwise, it just doesn't refresh it at all, right? The fourth one is to publish our data model into Microsoft Fabric. And fifth step, which is one of the most important steps, if we don't do it, we miss the entire thing. To refresh, the initial refresh of the data, we have to refresh our semantic model. After this step, Power BI generates the partitions and populates each partition. Okay, so let me see. Are there any questions around that?
There is no other question, mate.
Okay.
Nope.
And people can raise their hands if they want, okay, to ask questions, to unmute, and yeah. Now let's talk about challenges. And these challenges mostly relate to when we are working with large data models, right? So partitioning strategy is crucial. Be careful. One of the challenges is that carefully determining the required historical and incremental range. If we do not pay attention to what we are setting in our incremental policy, we may end up changing the incremental policy, which means we have to republish our model into Fabric, and we have to refresh the entire table again, right? It would be a full refresh. You may say, okay, I'll use XMLA endpoint and connect from tabular editor and make a change over there. It doesn't work. You still need to do a full refresh, right? And handling data changes in historical range. And that is a very legitimate issue. What happens if I have a data change in the historical range, right? And there are ways to handle that. You can connect to your semantic model if you have premium licensing, and this specific scenario works only for premium users. You can have a premium per user licensing plan, or premium capacity, or Fabric capacity, right? But you need to be a premium user, and your semantic model needs to be a premium semantic model, right? You can use XMLA endpoint to connect to the semantic model, and then you can refresh the partitions over there. Misunderstanding or evolving business requirements, and that is another challenge, right? Changing partition policies is expensive. And let's say I have previously, we talked to the business and they decided to keep only 5 years of data, right? And 5 years of data created a data model size of 25 gigabytes or 20 gigabytes. Now you talk to the business and they say, actually, we want 10 years of data, right? That is a big challenge to tackle, right? And the other one is modifying an existing model to support hybrid tables. As I mentioned before, this can have some real world challenges. You perhaps lose a little bit of hair over there, but that is something to be aware of. So let's say that aim to understand the business requirements as best of your ability, and then start the implementation. Otherwise, sometimes making a change would be super expensive, right? And what if the data source cannot support the required concurrency of hybrid tables, right? If the data source is an Azure Synapse dedicated pool, it doesn't like concurrent queries, right? If I create a hybrid table and it is just firing a lot of concurrent queries back to my dedicated pool, it just doesn't like it. Well, there is a cap. on the number of concurrent queries, right? So be mindful of the supported concurrent queries. The next challenge that we may face is challenges in development working with large data volumes. It would be, if I'm a developer, it would be really time consuming to pipe in 200 million of rows. You have to wait half an hour or an hour for that model to just load. And bigger problem is that you probably cannot even save. Your laptop cannot even cater for that kind of data because perhaps you have I don't know, 32 or 64 gigabytes of RAM, and you are just using all the available resources, or maybe there is no available resources available on your machine, right? And the other problem is that when the file size is getting really large, you cannot save your model on your local machine. You just cannot save it. Power BI Desktop refuses to save, and it starts giving you error messages. So what do we do in this case? All right. That is a question. Okay, so let me give you the answer. For this one, what we do is we try to keep the range that we are looking at from the range start and range end. We try to keep that range as small as possible, right? Let's say I'm as a developer, I may end up loading just only 1 day of data into my data model, right? Okay. And initial data refresh failure, that is another big problem, because if you are really dealing with large amounts of data, it may take a long time to load the data, right? And you may get throttled or you may get timeout. What do we do in that kind of scenario, right? Okay, so, and in that scenario, there is an option to apply incremental refresh policies without refreshing the entire data model in Microsoft Fabric. You either use Tom language if you are pretty familiar with C# programming. You can use Tom language, tabular object model, or you can use tabular editor. And the amazing Daniel Otikia created tabular editor, and it is pretty easy to use tool. You can right click on the table and say just apply incremental policies, right? And then what you would do, you would run the first refresh, which will populate your incremental range only. And you obviously need to use a tool, an XMLA endpoint. You can use SQL Server Management Studio to connect to your premium workspace, and then refreshing the partitions. Okay, let's talk about best practices. Number one best practice: investigate the data source's complexity, limitations, and current size and growth ratio. Let's say I'm gonna create a data model which works on a retail market, right? And I have millions of transactions every day, right? And my granularity would be from date and time perspective would be at the day level, right? So that is pretty important to understand. Second practice is to keep the date range between range start and range and small, and to solve the problem that the data modelers and developers may face. Second, the third one is be mindful of number of parallelism. We can change the number of parallelism in Power BI Desktop, or we can use SQL Server Management Studio and run some connect through the XMLA endpoint and run Temcell to just change the parallelism, but we have to be mindful of the supported parallelism at this data source as well, right? Consider applying incremental policies without partition refresh on premium semantic models, which, as I mentioned, you can use tabular editor, or if you are fluent in C#, you can write Tom codes over there. Validate your partitioning strategy before implementation. That is also something that we touched earlier. So it is important to validate your partitioning strategy and going back and forth in different discovery sessions with the business to understand that you completely got the business requirements, and then start implementing. Consider using detect data changes for more efficient data refreshes, right? So here's the thing: you can monitor your refreshes. This is a tool built by my legend, Mr. Phil Seamark, who is in the Power BI CAT team in Microsoft now. He used to be an MVP. I would suggest you have a look at his blog. It is dax.tips, and look for analyze my refresh. In this particular example, I changed the number of parallelism into 12, and that's why it shows 12 slots here, starting from 0 to 11, right? The other one is using a tabular editor to change the maximum number of refreshes, which is 12. I think it is a little bit too small to see. Sorry about that, but that is as large as I could take a screenshot. And this is again tabular editor, and you can right click on a table and you can say apply refresh policy. So that applies the refresh policies into an already published semantic model on Microsoft Fabric. And you can use Management Studio to look at your partitions and the number of records in each partition. So we have many options here. And you can also implement the detect data changes in Power BI, which which uses something called refresh bookmarks, right? And in this one is a custom one that I developed, right? So I will ask this question later again, and if you answer the question correctly, you will get a free copy of my book, right? So I am conscious of time, and I have how much time do we have, Wade? I think we have only 5 minutes, right?
No, more than that. We can go, if there is no questions, we can continue for 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any questions?
There are some questions in the chat. Let me find them. The first one is, does report server support this feature?
Oh, that's a very good question. I never tried it. Maybe that's a good exercise for you to go and try.
Yeah, I'm 99% sure there isn't any feature like this on report server, but we have a good session, question and answer about the report server tomorrow. The last session is with Arman. He's a really expert person in that area, and that session is set just for the question and answer. So this is the good question. I will ask that question there. So if you are there, you can ask that one. But 99% sure there isn't any feature like this.
Okay.
And okay, let's go through the second question. Is it possible we define the time to full refresh model? For example, Friday, we have full refresh, and during week, incremental refresh.
No. Well, that was a straight no. Okay, so a solution just jumped to my head. Well, if you are referring to the refreshes that you have available on Microsoft Fabric, the answer is no. you can schedule the refreshes, and it will go through the regular refresh. The first one will be initial refresh, and the next ones will be incremental refreshes. But there are ways you can implement your own mechanism. Let's say I can create a logic app which runs some PowerShell scripts, and I can say that on every Friday of each week, do a full refresh of these partitions, right? That is called customized refresh, you know. And you need to have a premium licensing plan for that, because it requires XML endpoint, right? Yeah. I don't think it would be possible to use Power BI APIs for that. Any other questions? Or anyone else in the call that can answer these questions have a better approach than I do?
Yeah, so feel free, if you want to unmute yourself, raise your hand and ask your question or anything, comments, feedback. Silence.
Great. Everyone is so shy here. Okay, let me okay, so I have to share my screen again, and it would be a different screen.
I remember you asked the question and you said if anyone's answered that question, we get a free book.
I have not asked the question yet, right? So
okay.
this is the show and tell part, right? So I have 3 tables, and every single table has a incremental data refresh enabled on them, right? So this one has the default detect changes. This one has custom detect changes, and this one has just follows the regular incremental data refresh. Or right click on it to show you the this is the policies of my internet sales. So I'm keeping 10 years of data and 7 days of incremental refresh, right? And this one is the default auto detect, right? So if I go there, you'll see that I click here, I ticked here, and I selected a different column. The column that we select here cannot be the same column that we used in range start and range end parameters, right? That contains the last updated date of each record in my fact table, right? And this is getting quite interesting now, right? This specific settings, I am okay. So just bear with me. Just bear with me. This is the regular detect data changes setting within Power BI Desktop, right? The third option that I already told you is the custom data changes, right? Which is where is it? Incremental refresh, yeah, which is this one. And as you see, I did not tick that box over you. That's so big. Okay, I did not tick that box over here. I actually changed the settings after I published the model into Microsoft Fabric using Tabular Editor, right, on a premium workspace. So let me bring Tabular Editor over here to show you the changes, right? When we look at Tabular Editor, and this specific one, if I select the default detect changes table, there is an attribute, or there is a property under the refresh policy property. I have polling expression. This polling expression, if you look at that, it's a regular Power Query expression, and it says go to every single partition and give me the maximum number of the column that is used for detecting data changes, which in my case was last last updated, and tell me if the previous value that I had, and it records the previous values, if it changed. If it is changed, it truncates that partition and refreshes, right? That is the default. But what we can do, we can actually be more clever. We can create our own query in Power Query, which gets the maximum value of that column without loading yet another column with most probably very high cardinality into our fact table, which makes the fact table even larger and even less performant, right? That is one issue that we may face. And the second issue, which is more important, is that this specific setting fires a yet another query to every single partition to get the maximum value of the last updated date. Oof, I'm talking a lot here, okay? But this is interesting, right? So we can do that. Okay, let me show you how I did it. I think we are almost at time, so I go back to edit query, and this is how we do it, right? So we create a new query, and we don't really need to load it, and this is a very simplistic implementation. You can take care of it in your backend data source. You can create a new table with your ETL pipelines and do all the magic over there. But this is a code, right? This is the very simplistic version, and this one is generating an integer. And as you can see, it is an integer. It returns an integer, right? It gets a maximum date of each partition and calculates the difference between a first date, that in my case, I used 1970s 0101, 1st of January 1970, right? And this is the duration between that date and the maximum date of for each partition, right? I hope that makes sense. My sound is very low. Sorry about that. You had to tell earlier. It's almost finished.
It's fine here. I think it should be an issue in your side, because I can hear your voice clear. Let me know if you have any similar issue in the chat, or just give me a thumbs up if the sound is good.
Okay. Now, this is the question that you will get a free copy of my book, right? And it is that how does Power BI incremental refresh handle changes in the underlying data source, such as updates, deletes, or something on the previously loaded data on historical range? Remember, doesn't refresh the historical partitions at all. It merges the historical, partitions, the lower granular historical partitions into year level or month level, but it does not refresh it. Come on. Answer.
Is there just one book or more than one book?
One book. It would be one book per session, one for tonight and one for tomorrow night.
Okay, so unmute yourself, guys. Just test your answers. There is a book waiting for you.
And look, I already explained it today. So if you have listened carefully, you have to quickly jump in and give me the answer.
Use GPT at least. Just say something.
Yeah. So the answer is that we have to connect through some. Am I gonna give the answer or wait for
wait
a couple of seconds?
There is an answer here. Use direct query import mode.
No, I am sorry. Okay, so we can use third-party tools such as SQL Server Management Studio is bread and butter for many people who
Okay,
work with.
wait. Is
Yes.
it related to partitions? There is another answer.
Partitions. What do you mean? It's definitely related to partitions and all. Well, the question is
Okay.
about partitions.
Okay, is okay. Hold on. I don't know, is Mr. or Mrs. Rahimi? Can you explain that partitions you mentioned there? If you want to unmute yourself, I think you can win, or you can take this book home. Oh. No.
Okay.
Not a chance.
Yeah, we can use SQL Server Management Studio or Tabular Editor, right? Any of those. And we can, okay, so here's what I'm doing. I am connected to my Power BI, and these are the tables that you saw the on the other side in Power BI Desktop. You can right click on a table, say partitions, right? And now it shows me my partitions as it was showing before. I don't know why it is circling now. But okay, so these are my partitions. And let's say this partition has a data change in it, and I am aware of that. I just need to just process this partition, right? I will publish a blog post in the next couple of weeks exactly explaining this, because we can actually automate this. We can write some PowerShell scripts that identifies the historical partition, because there are some cases that in some businesses, let's say I'm in retail, you buy something from me today and you're not happy with it, and you return it next 2 weeks, right? And I give you full refund, right? But it has happened after 2 weeks, right? And I have my incremental refresh for only 7 days. I can create a mechanism that goes and detects those changes and refresh a historical partition frequently, let's say once a month or once a week, right? Actually, that was a question that someone asked, right? That I said every Friday you can refresh it. That is exactly that question. Thank you very much, everyone. And don't worry that if you didn't answer the question, Wahid and myself will go through your questions and we will pick a winner, right? So we have a winner already today or tonight, right? So don't worry.
Yeah.
One of you will get a free copy of electronic copy of my book, and hopefully you enjoy it. And that's pretty much it from me.
Yeah, and just to know, just to let you know, there will be another session with Soheil tomorrow in Persian. All sessions tomorrow will be in Persian language, and there will be some free books as well. So
yeah,
that's perfect. Thank you so much, Soheil. It was a great session, and hopefully we have another session with you tomorrow. So that's great. See you tomorrow, mate. Thank you.
Yeah, see you tomorrow. Thank you very much, everyone. See you later. Bye-bye.